All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Tom Campbell. I'm the director of the Fine Art Museums, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this inaugural day of the Manet and Morisot show and of the inaugural lecture by the curator, Emily Beeny. One of the great pleasures in being a director is working with talented staff. And there's nothing more excited when that talented staff comes to you with an idea, a passion project, and it fits, and you're able to watch that curator nurturing and developing a project from conception to realization. And that has been very much the case with this exhibition. Emily, we talked about this exhibition when Emily joined about 4 years ago, and it was an idea, and it's been a real joy to watch it developing over the years, and the joy that Emily has taken in all the battles of getting loans and developing it, exploring the ideas and really seeing it realized. So it's a really triumphal day. Of course, Manet and Morisot are two such well-known figures, but often considered separately, or when considered in the same breath, it's often as the sort of the teacher-pupil relationship, the man teaching the woman. And of course, what Emily's exhibition reveals is the much greater complexity of this relationship. She will talk about it, so I'm not going to jump in there, but really bringing an entirely fresh lens to this subject, and I think helping us to see the relationship of these artists, and indeed the entire Impressionist movement in which they were so involved in their different ways with a new light. So it's an exciting subject. You're in for a treat. My job really is just to thank some people, and it's a long list. Obviously, we have some major loans here. Masterpieces from the Musée d'Orsay, the National Gallery. So we especially want to thank our colleagues at those two institutions and at the Musée Monet and the Norton Simon and the National Gallery in London, whose key loans really anchored this project. After it closes, it'll be going to the Cleveland Museum of Art, so we're delighted to be collaborating with our colleagues there. I think I have to do a really big shout out to our colleagues at the Fine Art Museums. You've probably become accustomed in recent years to, I think, just the beauty of the shows that we have installed, and there is such a great team behind the scenes doing the design, publishing the books, making the films. It really takes a big village, so thank you to everyone involved, especially when they were also juggling the Art of Manga exhibition, which is now on view at the De Young, and the Roseby Simpson Lexicon installation, and the new Indigenous art galleries. So it's been a busy season, but I'm very proud of everything we've pulled off. I also want to thank our donors, our presenting sponsors, Barbara Wolfe, Cynthia and John Gunn, Denise Littlefield-Sobel, and many others. In fact, I'm delighted to see so many of our trustees and donors here in the audience today, and they're all listed in the catalogue and on the entrance wall, but you know who you are, and thank you so much for your support. We have a rich set of programs around this exhibition. Next Saturday, I hope you will join us again for a conversation that Emily will lead with colleagues from the National Gallery, who organized the Manet Degas exhibition, and lots of mutual ideas to share and discuss there. But I think that's it. I think, without further ado, I'm going to introduce Emily. Emily is our chief curator at the Legion of Honor and the Barbara A. Wolfe curator in charge of European paintings. She is a specialist in French paintings and drawings of the 17th to 19th centuries. She received her PhD from Columbia University with a dissertation on Nicolas Poussin. Before coming to San Francisco, she served as Associate Curator of Drawings at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, where her exhibition projects included Manet and Modern Beauty, La Surprise, Watteau in Los Angeles, and Poussin and the Dance. She has held curatorial appointments at the Museum of Fine Arts Boston and the Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena, and currently serves on both the vetting committee for TFAF, Maastricht, and the editorial board for the Boletín del Museo del Prado. In addition to organizing Manet and Morisot, Emily is hard at work on another major international exhibition on the Baroque master Simon Vouet, slated to open in 2027. Who said old masters are boring? We are going to prove them wrong. Emily was awarded the Prix de rayonnement de la langue et de la littérature française by the Académie Française. And with that, Emily, welcome.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for that kind introduction, and tremendous thanks to all of you for being here with us to celebrate the opening of Manet and Morisot, a day I've been looking forward to, as Tom explained, for quite a few years. This really is the first major exhibition devoted to the friendship and artistic exchange between Édouard Manet and Berthe Morisot, and I think that ours is the first exhibition of its kind may come as a surprise, since unfolding over a period of roughly 15 years, from the late 1860s to the early 1880s, theirs really was the closest relationship between any two members of the wider Impressionist circle. As friends and colleagues, as painter and model, as collectors of each other's work, and following Morisot's marriage to Manet's brother in 1874, family. It had a determining effect on the course of art history, for the story of this relationship is written in these two artists' pictures. Seen side by side, the paintings now on view in our galleries trace the evolution of a singular friendship, by turns collaborative and competitive, playful and charged, lit by an enduring mutual sympathy and a shared desire to make art new. As people and as painters, Manet and Morisot were, of course, quite different, where he was all charm and wit, open to the world in ways then possible only for a man of his elevated social class and particular temperament. She was admired for her formidable reserve, her discreet elegance and intelligence, the corresponding virtues of a correct bourgeoise. The pleasures of Manet's art, of course, lie in its indelible graphic power, its dialogue with the old masters, its joyous outsized ambition. Those of Morisot's work are subtler pleasures of light and surface, of images like breath on glass that seem to shimmer with the possibility of their own disappearance. Manet was a studio painter in origin and in essence, and generally produced pictures he hoped would look dashed off in a moment, only through protracted revisions, carefully concealed. Morisot, by contrast, who was formed almost from the beginning as a plein air landscape painter, could work swiftly and decisively under changing conditions of light and weather. Though cast by contemporary press as the father of Impressionism, Manet, of course, never joined the Impressionists' group exhibitions, preferring the public salon as his arena of combat. Conversely, Morisot was among the movement's earliest and most faithful adherents, recognizing in the group's independent exhibitions an opportunity to share experimental work and showing hers in all but one of them. From the beginning, critics mistook Morisot for Manet's pupil, whether intending to flatter or to denigrate, and many 20th century art historians, alas, followed suit, reducing their complex relationship to the beguiling portraits that Manet painted of Morisot, overlooking or indeed disparaging her own work to cast her as model and muse. But as several of the artist's first biographers already understood, and as feminist scholarship of more recent decades has confirmed, while Morisot looked to Manet for inspiration and approval during her early career, in the 1870s and early 1880s, As Morisot's work became more daring and garnered widespread acclaim, Manet began to follow her example, emulating her choice of subjects, her high-keyed colors, and most especially her rapid, fluttering brushstrokes. The result is an extraordinary convergence witnessed in pictures like these. The two artists surely crossed paths at the Louvre in the mid-1860s. Like others of their generation, both visited regularly to make copies after the old masters. He was already famous, or infamous, for bold modern life paintings that had shocked the Parisian art establishment. Her submissions to the annual state-sponsored salon, chiefly landscapes, meanwhile attracted little notice. He was in his 30s and married. She was in her 20s and not. He came to the Louvre on his own. She was accompanied by her mother, a watchful chaperone, and her sister Edma, an equally accomplished painter, whose portrait of Morisot before her easel we see here. The introduction was made by Henri Fontaine-Latour, a fellow artist and mutual friend who here portrayed Manet as the leader of a new realist generation. Writing to Fontaine in the summer of 1868, Manet would remark, "I'm of the same opinion. The young Morisot ladies are charming. It's a bother they're not men, but as women they could still serve the cause of painting by marrying an academician each and sowing discord in the dotards' camp." Here, Morisot makes her first appearance in Manet's correspondence as someone whose sensibility should have made her a brother in arms in the fight for progressive art, but whose gender instead qualified her as a marriage prospect for someone else. By the fall of 1868, Morisot was visiting Manet's studio regularly, chaperoned by her mother to pose for the balcony. Transforming a green railing and shutters into a bright proscenium, Manet's composition proposes a theater of enigmatic sociability. As most always in his exhibition works, one protagonist attracts our gaze with her own, at once magnetic and inscrutable. Here is Morisot, costumed in a dressing gown, her dark curls worn loose, playing a woman evidently at home. She rests one elbow on the railing, clasping her fan shut and casting her eyes off to the left, oblivious of her companions, modeled by the landscape painter Antoine Guillemet and the violinist Fanny Clos. When the picture was unveiled at the Salon in May 1869, critics fretted over its narrative incoherence, comparing the figures to wax dolls in a dime store window, and Manet's handling to that of a house painter. He nevertheless retained a naive hope of finding a buyer, claiming that Berthe brought him luck. But what she actually brought was keen understanding, offering an incisive assessment of the picture in a letter to her sister, Edma. His paintings, as always, create the impression of a wild or even still slightly green fruit. I'm far from disliking them. I am more strange than ugly. Apparently, the epithet femme fatale has been circulating among connoisseurs. By the time the exhibition opened, Morisot's own practice had reached a crisis point. Having exhibited regularly at the Salon over the previous 5 years, mostly Barbizon-inflected landscapes like the one pictured here, she showed nothing of her own in 1869. In March, Edma, her beloved sister and artistic collaborator, had married a naval officer, joining him at Lorient in Brittany and giving up painting altogether. Morisot's own work ground to a halt. Writing to Edma, she laid out plans for a visit that summer. "I'm absolutely counting on my stay at Lorient to make something passable. I've made absolutely nothing since you left," and begin to despair about it. The visit would not disappoint, providing Morisot with an opportunity to renew her practice with a fresh emphasis on the human figure. Morisot painted 2 pivotal canvases at Lorient with Edma as her model, a harbor view showing her sister perched on a canal wall under a hot summer sky, and an interior scene given over almost entirely to her sister's likeness. This latter work presents striking similarities with the one for which Morisot herself had finished posing just a few months before. Both Manet's balcony and Morisot's young woman at her window feature seated women in white, holding fans and framed by balcony windows. The two artists' methods of positioning these women and their beholders, though, could scarcely be more different. Where Manet's picture grants us a glimpse of a private interior, observed as if from the public street, Morisot's offers a slice of the street glimpsed from within an interior. While Manet gives us a view of the balcony, Morisot grants us a view from the balcony. Lost in thought, her young woman fingers the pleats of her fan, paying no attention to the window before her, where we, of course, catch a glimpse of window treatments of the same shocking green hue as Manet's balcony railing. Brief strokes of paint, some delicate and faint as pencil marks, some in unexpected shades of red and blue, pick out the tendrils of the young woman's hair, the features of her face. Morisot makes no attempt, however, to reveal the contents of this young woman's mind, conjuring instead the privacy of thought itself. Back in Paris, both pictures received an enthusiastic response from Manet, to whom Morisot presented Harbor at Lorient as a gift, the first picture by one of these two painters to enter the other's collection. On Manet's advice, Morisot submitted the other canvas to the Salon of 1870, where its companion piece would be a work with a more troubled history. A double portrait of her sister and mother, the only canvas we know both artists touched. Receiving mixed feedback on the likeness of her mother from her close friend and sometimes suitor, Puvis de Chavannes, Morisot sought Manet's guidance. He promised to stop by and advise, but on arriving instead picked up her brushes and began repainting the figure. Evidently concentrating on the skirt and face where broad application, particularly of black, white, and gray paint, accords oddly with the more patient and refined approach we find elsewhere on the canvas, and that is indeed more typical of Morisot's facture at this stage. She was furious, hurt and confused at this reckless act of self-assertion, and mortified when forced to surrender the canvas for delivery to the Salon jury, confiding to her mother she'd rather throw herself in the Seine than see her picture hang in the exhibition. But hang it would. Both of Morisot's submissions were accepted, attracting little critical attention. "I don't make as grotesque an impression as I feared," she remarked. Her fury cooled. It's nevertheless telling, though, that instead of fawning gratitude, her immediate response to Manet's meddling was one of furious, frustrated independence. The same salon witnessed the debut of another female artist associated with Manet, Eva Gonzalez, a pupil of Charles Le Chaplin who had studied with Manet for just over a year and sat for this portrait, likewise exhibited in 1870, over the course of many months. Dressing her in a white gown and casting her as a successor to the great women artists of the 18th century, Manet compelled Gonzalez to pose at least 40 times, scrubbing out the face so often the canvas threatened to give way. Morisot, surely missing her own sessions in Manet's studio, each a precious opportunity for observation and exchange, vented her irritation with both her friend and his pupil in letters to Edma. Though she had at first described it as the best thing he's ever done, on seeing the portrait unveiled at the Salon, she offered a cooler assessment. It's passable, and nothing more. Morisot's own sittings soon resumed, as she posed, probably over the summer of 1870, for her only other salon-scale likeness by Manet. With its dark-haired model and billowing white dress, the picture might seem a kind of sequel to the Gonzalez portrait, but the strange, even scandalous lassitude of Morisot's pose and the implicit fiction made explicit by the painting's eventual title, Repose, of capturing a model resting between formal posing sessions, place this painting in a separate category. This picture, as Manet reassured the subject's mother some years later, is not at all in the character of a portrait. By the time he wrote these lines, though, the canvas was squirreled away in a friend's cellar, for a dark chapter was unfolding in Paris. And by the time Repose finally went on view at the Salon in 1873, both artists' worlds had been remade. The comparison has become a classic, a cliché even. Two views captured on canvases of broad marine format show the same slice of Paris from high ground on the right bank. These pictures are nevertheless utterly distinct in purpose and effect, reflecting their authors' utterly distinct relationships to the urban landscape and its meaning. One is a studio concoction, the other a plein air study. One is a portrait of second imperial spectacle, the other the souvenir of a strange, unsettled time that followed. Both reflect their author's deep and kindred sense of themselves as Parisiens de Paris. Painted during the Exposition Universelle, the World's Fair of 1867, Manet's scene deploys the fairground fantasy of the Champ de Mars as a backdrop for the theater of modern life. Top-hatted dandies take in the view, and imperial soldiers take a break. An elegant lady rider perches on her prancing steed. A little groom walks a big dog, and so on. Surely slotted in from individual pencil sketches of the kind Manet often made on the street, these figures represent various urban types, stock characters of the modern city. The urban landscape itself is dramatically upstaged, suggested in a fragmentary jumble of monuments, just recognizable bridges, towers, domes. Painted about 5 years later, Morisot's picture provides a quite different experience. The parade ground of the Champ de Mars, emptied of the World's Fair, stretches out at right, a vast, vacant lot beneath a low cloud cover. Urban geography is precisely rendered. Successive bridges march into the distance along the Seine. The gleaming dome of the Invalides at right stands closer to our vantage than the towers of Saint-Sulpice and the distant dome of the Panthéon, rendered in pale atmospheric perspective. Drinking it all in the right foreground stands the little girl, her back turned, inviting us to share in her sensations of light and air. For this whole scene, unlike Manet's, appears observed from life, with Morisot setting up her easel at the edge of the Place du Trocadéro, at the end of her own street, to sketch the scene. Morisot had surely seen Manet's picture in his studio when sitting for the balcony in repose, but painted her own view under very different circumstances and at a very different moment in history. After the ravages of 1870 to 1871, the année terrible of the Franco-Prussian War, the siege of Paris, and the Commune. As Prussian troops closed in on the French capital in the fall of 1870, Manet and his brothers joined the National Guard, fighting alongside other artists from his friend Edgar Degas to the academic Ernest Meissonier. Manet's family was sent away to safety in the south, fleeing with other civilians, but Morisot and her parents remained behind, enduring the terror and privations of the months that followed, near starvation, disease, bitter cold, and shelling. The letters Manet addressed to his wife paint a vivid picture of the city under siege and offer a glimpse into the hardships faced by the Morisot ladies, whom Manet and his brothers visited when they could. Manet, of course, painted little. This view of Petit Montrouge near the city ramparts is a notable exception, but he had stashed 12 of his most valuable canvases, the balcony and repose included, for safekeeping with his friend Théodore Duret, a critic and collector, and could rest assured that these would emerge from the conflict unscathed. Morisot, sick and almost starving, produced no new work at all, and much worse, lost most everything she had made to date. Though her father placed the family's fine furniture in storage, he offered only a pitying smile when she suggested that her studio contents, too, might merit protective measures. Sure enough, upon returning home after the final round of Prussian shelling, her mother found almost everything destroyed. Morisot had no collector friend to keep her pictures safe, and at a stroke, 14 years' production all but vanished. In early February, following the surrender of Paris, both artists left the city, Manet to rejoin his family in the south, Morisot to stay with her sisters at Cherbourg. Packing her bags, Morisot wrote to Edma, "I've emerged from the siege utterly disgusted with my fellow men, even my greatest friends," adding dryly, "Manet spent the whole siege changing his uniform." The crippling financial terms of the French surrender and the new regime's abrupt end to a moratorium on rent touched off an uprising known as the Paris Commune, which took control of the capital in March and was suppressed 2 months later with shocking violence. In a brief period known as the Semaine Sanglante, government troops slaughtered some 20,000 Parisians, a massacre Manet memorialized in this watercolor. It is with these traumatic events in mind that we must consider Morisot's placid view of Paris, this eerily empty city, dazed but still standing, with new saplings planted along the river and new dresses donned for a stroll. In June 1871, Manet addressed one of his most substantial surviving letters to Morisot, remarking, "What terrible events, and how shall we come out of it all?" Continuing on a brighter note, "I think, mademoiselle, you are not going to stay long in Cherbourg. Everyone is coming back to Paris. In any case, it is impossible to live anywhere else." Affinities between works by Manet and Morisot are, of course, not always a matter of direct and immediate influence, of a specific picture painted by one artist and seen by the other. Compositional similarities that emerge in the early 1870s also speak to increasingly shared habits of seeing, formed by looking at each other's work, the work of friends, but also by shared experiences as members of a Parisian milieu limping out of the terrible year. Two interior scenes dated to the year or so following the siege and commune offer us a case in point. Each features a seated figure in profile at right, who appears beside another in lost profile, looking out a window at left. The picture's protagonists do not interact. A mood of quiet reverie, perhaps even melancholy, pervades them, and a window framing an outside world unseen or imperfectly glimpsed plays a prominent role in each. As ever, the pictures are quite different. One, a modest work, evidently abandoned incomplete, the other, a large, exquisitely finished exhibition picture. Yet they share preoccupations with natural light and interior space, with intimacy, with loneliness. Interior at Arcachon is among the first canvases Manet painted after the war, marking his reunion with his family in a coastal town near Bordeaux. As the document of this long-anticipated meeting, though, the painting is oddly muted. Manet's godson, Léon, smokes a cigarette and stares into space, a neglected book spread on his knee. The painter's wife, Suzanne, props one leg on a stool, pen and paper in her lap, eyes fixed on the sea. Suzanne's letters to Manet during their 6 months apart do not survive, but his to her are filled with expressions of love and longing to see her sweet face. How strange, then, here to turn that face away, rendering her body in a series of round volumes. Evidently unsatisfied with the work, Manet scraped down large sections before abandoning the effort altogether. The resulting effect captures the uneasy mood in a family reunited after very different wartime experiences. Manet's stay in the South had some bearing on Morisot, too, for he and his brother Eugène had evidently tried to persuade her to accompany Eugène on the journey to Bordeaux in what Manet later characterized as a marriage scheme. Morisot had demurred, nursing a new dream of financial independence, as she wrote to her sister that spring. "I don't know if I'm fooling myself, but it seems to me that a painting like the one I gave to Manet could perhaps be saleable, and that is my whole ambition." Her mother, however, counseled marriage. Everyone agrees that it's better to marry, making some sacrifices, than to remain independent in a position that isn't real. One must think that in a few years she will be lonelier, with fewer connections, and that as her charms abandon her, she will have many fewer friends than she believes she does now. Such anxieties, though, were by no means unreasonable. They offer a useful backdrop against which to consider Morisot's interior. The scene unfolds in an elegant apartment, paneled in white and gold. A young woman in black, not to be mistaken for mourning dress, given the glimmer of jewelry at her throat and wrist, sits with her hands in her lap, composed, unreadable. She wears no wedding band. An empty chair suggests she may be awaiting a visitor. Perhaps the person whose arrival at a street door below the little girl may observe from the window at left. The intricate still life at right is difficult to parse. A gilt-framed mirror hangs on the wall. Before the mirror stands a large, round planter, its gilded lip barely containing an overflow of greenery. Against the planter rests what some scholars have identified as an unframed canvas, a still life painting within the painting. This detail could offer a clue that the space is more than a drawing room. Might it also be an occasional artist's studio? Post-war repairs to Morisot's backyard studio likely forced her to paint inside her parents' house, and upon their move to a smaller apartment in 1873, she converted a bedroom there into a studio, working under similarly merged domestic and professional conditions for most of her subsequent career. A far cry, of course, from Manet's proper studios, fully separate and professionalized. This is, of course, not to suggest that interior is some sort of self-portrait, but its protagonist's careful toilette and studied composure suggests that the visit she awaits might be one with bearing on her future. The kind of visit that Morisot, who turned 30 in January 1871 and feared she had lost her looks during the siege, might no longer expect in the post-war period. Could the still life painting, possibly tucked behind the young woman's chair, be her own handiwork? Is she contemplating a choice between marriage on the one hand and art on the other? While the subject of Morisot's interior sat in wait, the artist herself had begun sitting again for Manet, who painted a series of smaller, more informal portraits in the years immediately following the war. The project was her idea, as she explained to Edma in August 1871. Once again, Manet finds me not too ugly and would like to have me back as a model. In the end, out of boredom, I suggested it to him myself. What followed was a long and fruitful collaboration, resulting in at least 8 canvases, usually dated to the period between the artist's return to Paris in August 1871 and Morisot's marriage to Eugène Manet in late 1874. Signed and dated 1872, Berthe Morisot with a bouquet of violets, seen here, was probably among the first. The likeness is transfixing. Its author's delight in his model's direct gaze, untidy hair, and singular presence felt, I think, in every stroke. Years later, Morisot's daughter, Julie, hung it in her bedroom, remarking in her diary, "One can scarcely believe it was made in just 1 or 2 sittings at most. Mama used to tell me she posed for it during the day before a Thursday dinner at Granny's. That day, Uncle Édouard told Mama she ought to marry Papa and talked to her about it for a long while." Julie's story is of interest on multiple fronts. First, it confirms that this is a picture painted with breathless speed. Its bold interplay of black and white, light and shadow, worked out over the course of just 1 or 2 sittings. The experience must have been exhilarating for Manet, who always aspired to spontaneity, but seldom truly achieved it. Second, Julie's account tells us this painting was made not in the artist's studio, but in the apartment he and Suzanne shared with Manet's mother, Eugénie. This detail links the picture's glimmering background to the ruffled curtains of Eugénie Manet's drawing room, rendered more explicitly in this likeness of Suzanne. Third and finally, Julie's story frames the portrait with a bouquet of violets in the context of her parents' future marriage, casting Manet in the role of matchmaker. Some observers may struggle to reconcile this aspect of the account with what the picture shows, the palpable excitement of the encounter, conjured with rapt and sensuous delight. The intensity of both Morisot's regard and Manet's here produces an effect uncannily reminiscent of self-portraiture, a merging of painter and subject never quite equaled in Manet's oeuvre. Though the violets in Morisot's corsage, symbolizing both love and modesty, might cut either way, one cannot help but wonder whether Eugène was in fact the primary topic of conversation, or indeed thought, in Granny's drawing room that Thursday afternoon. Perhaps surprisingly, the painting was not a gift to its model, who received instead a dainty still life of violets, a fan, and a folded note, inscribed with a tantalizing dedication, "To Mademoiselle Berthe, ... The intervening text is illegible, E. Manet." It was his first picture to enter her collection. The associated portrait, whether by sale or by gift, went to Manet's friend and patron Théodore Duret. Manet did give another of his portraits to Morisot, though, similarly intense and amused. Here her toilette is no less distinctive. The dark, untidy crown of hair, the black ribbon at her throat, the lace dress of that same somber hue punctuated with a little nosegay. Pas coquette, mais toujours élégante, as her daughter would remember. She had a quite personal taste. Manet painted her in black lace and pink slippers. Of the famous pink slippers, which Morisot wore in defiance of contemporary fashion, and which appear in 2 other portraits from the series, we find no trace in the bust-length likeness, though they may once have figured in this canvas, which Manet cut down dramatically before giving it to Morisot in 1873. Winsome and intimate, it is a fragment. An unfinished painting found in Manet's studio at the time of his death may provide a sense of this portrait's original composition. Depicting the dark-haired model semi-recumbent on a sofa, this painting was attributed by Manet's godson to the Duchess Colonna, that is, to Adèle d'Affry, a fellow artist and close friend of Morisot's, who exhibited sculpture at the Salon under the pseudonym Marcello, and in 1873 chaperoned one of Morisot's posing sessions in Manet's studio. The fragmentary portrait's original composition also links it to one of Manet's most dazzling pictures from the period, Lady with Fans, a monumental likeness of the eccentric writer, composer, and salonière Nina de Callias. Rendered in shimmering brushwork, her pseudo-Algerian costume and Japanese backdrop produce what Manet's contemporaries would have recognized as an exotic boudoir atmosphere. Indeed, the theme of a woman reclining on a sofa was in itself so intimate as to be reserved for the depiction of courtesans, mistresses, actresses in this period. Little wonder that de Callias's estranged husband warned Manet never to exhibit or sell her portrait. Though both were artists, the free-spirited de Callias and the socially correct Morisot had little in common, and on the surface, the two portraits, in progress at the very same moment, might seem as different as their sitters. But of course, Morisot's portrait, too, was once full length. Was Manet truly dissatisfied with his treatment of Morisot's lower extremities, or did he cut the canvas down in the interest of propriety before sending it home with her to her parents' house? Either way, Morisot plainly admired Lady with Fans, whose composition echoes through her own subsequent production, and which, as we shall see, would one day hang in her home. The two portraits generally considered last in this series are larger, half-lengths of matching format but distinct emotional registers. In the first, at left, turbulent to the point of expressionism, Morisot wears deep mourning for her father, who died in January 1874. In the second, more tightly painted, Morisot seems the soul of composure, plucking daintily at the folds of her fan in a gesture that calls attention to her engagement ring. Having courted for years, Morisot and Eugène Manet were engaged in the summer of 1874, though a rather startling note from Morisot's brother, Tiburce, on learning of the planned union complicates matters. So if you love Eugène Manet even a little bit, marry him heartily, squarely, and counting on the future. Not on him, since he'll never do anything. In your place, I know very well what I should do. I'd marry no one and adopt the free manners of a widow. Tiburce's hesitations about Eugène, whose outlook and personality could scarcely have been more different from his own, were specific. But he also worried more generally that his sister might make a marriage of convenience to stave off financial necessity in the wake of their father's death. Did Morisot confide to Manet Tiburce's teasing suggestion that she pass herself off as a widow to live an independent life? And is this the context in which her portrait with a veil, seemingly so charged with raw emotion, should actually be considered? Seen as pendants, the mourning and marriage pictures resonate strangely with the letter, offering a reminder that marriage, for Morisot, meant both the death of her old life and the birth of a new one. I'm doing Eve with Bichette, Morisot wrote to Edma in August 1871. They're giving me lots of trouble and growing leaden with reworking, and then the arrangement looks like a Manet. I realize it and am annoyed by it. The picture giving her such pains was Woman and Child on a Balcony. The irritating point of comparison would, of course, have been Manet's balcony, but by reversing our gaze, planting her easel behind the figures and looking out from the balcony, she made from this shared subject something new. Her picture marks the start of a conversation between the two artists, in which we observe them hand a compositional idea back and forth, transforming it and, in the process, their artistic relationship. Each composition in the sequence features a pair of figures, a young woman in dark clothing beside a little girl who turns her back to the beholder, grasping a railing and gazing into the distance. The idea evidently began with Morisot in August 1871, was taken up and modified by Manet in 1872-73, and received its final treatment from Morisot in the summer of 1874. Capturing a familiar Parisian vista from the terrace of her parents' home, Morisot portrayed her eldest sister, Eve, with her 4-year-old daughter, Paul-Marie Gobillard, known in the family as Bichette, turning away to take in the view. Bichette here resembles other little girls found in Morisot's view of Paris and interior, not because the same child must have posed for all three pictures, but because each child turns her back to the painter. Morisot may have borrowed this pose, a useful device for portraying squirmy young models, from contemporary fashion plates, which routinely presented little girls from behind, the better to display bows and bustles. More practically clad in placemocks, Morisot's children serve a richer purpose, functioning as beholders within the painting, stand-ins for the observer, or indeed for the painter herself, liminal figures between real and pictorial worlds. It was surely this mediating role that drew Manet to Morisot's motif, encountered during social visits to her parents' home in late 1871 or early 1872. The railway, well underway by the following autumn, would be his answer and his masterpiece of the period. Manet replaced Morisot's modest vertical canvas with a large horizontal format, her wide vista with a railroad cutting, and her sister with a professional model, Victorine Meurent, his great muse of the 1860s. But here again is a little girl in lost profile, grasping an iron railing and gazing into the distance, a proxy within the painted world for those of us outside of it. Like Morisot's, Manet's is a Parisian view painting of sorts, in this case a view of the neighborhood around the Gare Saint-Lazare train station, a product of Napoleon III's ruthless urban renewal campaign. The neighborhood was also Manet's home. In the fall of 1866, he and his wife and his godson moved in with his widowed mother at 49 Rue de Saint-Pétersbourg, and in July 1872, he relocated his studio to number 4 in the same street. The new studio, a bright, airy space originally built for fencing lessons, ushered in a new era for Manet, resulting in pictures that appeared lighter, brighter, looser, freer. The railway was his first major work painted there, and its upper left-hand corner contains a depiction of the studio doorway, a tall carriage entrance slotted in from a pencil sketch. The little girl is therefore, in some sense, staring fixedly at Manet through his studio window, even as her adult companion stares fixedly in the opposite direction, back at the painting's beholder. Signed and dated in 1873, the railway was the only one of Manet's 3 painting submissions not rejected by the jury in 1874. Morisot surely saw it in progress as she sat for her own portraits and on view at the Salon that spring. Returning to the shared motif the following summer while vacationing at the seaside resort of Fécamp, here the faithful Edma appears once again, seated on a beach house veranda beside her young daughter. The toddler, Jeanne, grasping the wooden railing, turning her back and looking out at the sea. Adopting Manet's horizontal arrangement, Morisot used it to paint a marine. Sailboats, a few licks of paint apiece, skim over pale green water, while a bright toy boat, its string in little Jeanne's fist, rests on the floor beside her. Joining Morisot and Edma at Fécamp were the Manets. And family lore held that Eugène and Morisot fell in love sketching boat builders in the port that summer. By summer's end, they had come to an understanding. And their mutual friend, Edgar Degas, had painted this portrait of the newly engaged Eugène. Fittingly, Degas would become the first real owner of Morisot's In a Villa by the Sea, cherished both as a personal souvenir of the summer and as a memento of a momentous year in the history of art. For it was Degas who had invited Morisot to join the Impressionists the previous spring, luring her away from the Salon over Manet's objections. Breathlessly painted, suggestive almost to the point of incoherence, In a Villa by the Sea announces a newfound independence surely linked to Morisot's brave new exhibition strategy. Formed in December 1873 with charter members including Monet, Pissarro, Renoir, Sisley, and Degas, the Impressionist joint stock company leased rooms in the Boulevard des Capucines at the studio of the photographer Nadar that March. There, a private exhibition of more than 200 works by 31 artists would open on April 15th. Manet had declined his colleagues' invitation to take part, preferring to wage his battle for progressive art at the public salon. Presented at the Palais de l'Industrie, where thousands of artworks appeared before hundreds of thousands of visitors. 1874 was a year of cruel rejection and conservative retrenchment. Manet's rejected paintings were among more than 2,000 turned away. Morisot had suffered partial rejections in 1872 and 73, showing a single pastel at each salon. But in 1874, all her pictures were refused, as an early April letter from Puvis de Chavannes, then a member of the jury, attests. Simply put, it's civil war. An idiotic civil war, if ever there was one. I know you're aware of your fate. They want Manet's head and will take it however they can. Had Morisot's association with Manet cost her a place at the Salon? And with that venue closed, how was she to sell her work? Puvis warned his friend off the independent show at Nadar's, fearing it would be labeled a Salon des Refusés, like those notoriously mounted by the State Arts Administration in 1863 and 73. Another letter, though, had arrived at the Morisot household in the meantime. Ostensibly addressed to the painter's mother, it contained an invitation to Morisot. "There are 20 to 25 of us," Degas wrote. "We expect a few more members. I recommend the exhibition to your daughter because I shall be part of it. And finally, because the name and talent of Mademoiselle Berthe Morisot are too much our concern to pass her over." Morisot accepted, throwing in her lot with the Impressionists and leaving the Salon behind forever. She was the only woman to exhibit under her own name that first year. It was a decision that would change the course of her life and work and seal her place in history. Puvis de Chavannes, however, was not the only one opposed. Morisot's former teacher, Joseph Guichard, wrote to her mother deploring his ex-pupil's participation and concluding, Manet was right to stand in the way of her exhibition. At this fork in the road, Morisot's great friend and mentor had pointed one way, and she had gone the other. He must have accepted her decision, though. One of her exhibited paintings was alone, number 106, Hide and Seek, the catalogue reads, belonging to Monsieur Manet. Though Manet's only public involvement was this loan, critics were quick to associate the independent exhibition with his name, treating the Impressionists as his disciples and students. Morisot was certainly no exception. Mademoiselle Berthe Morisot was a young lady of fine natural gifts who is steeped in the influence of Monsieur Manet, one critic wrote, asserting, "She can give us an admirable sketch of a young mother playing with her little daughter in a garden. This may be compared with the page of a novel read at haphazard on a railway journey." The association of Morisot's pictures with train travel hints at the effect of instantaneity achieved by her deft, rapid brushwork. It also inevitably ties this painting to Manet's contemporaneous Salon picture, with its railroad tracks and puff of steam. Morisot's reviews, though, were generally favorable, as another critic's rapturous account of this work demonstrates. Mademoiselle Berthe Morisot leads us into fields damp with seaside dew. She confronts the Parisienne's charming artifice with the charms of nature. What happy instincts in the way this muslin shawl gathers its pink border beside a blue or green parasol. Falling into a now familiar pattern of treating Morisot's painterly achievements as instinctive, a natural function of her gender, the critic nevertheless acknowledged her innovation in depicting fashionable urbanity, the Parisienne's sophisticated toilette and reading matter at an intersection with rural life, the open fields, a hay wagon clattering through the background. The critic's interest in the striped and polka-dotted shawl is telling. Signaling its decorative interest, he misses its practical function, namely, to protect the model's white dress from grass stains. For both reading and hide and seek reveal devices Morisot used to keep her models comfortable and occupied. The game that distracts a fidgety child, parasols and hats to keep off the sun, a shawl spread on wet grass, the turning pages of a book. Markers of femininity and fashion, good taste, to be sure, these clues also remind us that Morisot's pictorial world is not one that exists purely to be painted by her and beheld by us. Life continues all around her as she works, and by extension, all around us as we look. Hence the need for increasingly rapid brushwork, catching perception on the wing. As Jules Antoine Castagnari, perhaps the most insightful critic at the exhibition, wrote of Morisot's submission, "Here the execution accords with the idea expressed." Both pictures, their ideas, their expression, were plainly on Manet's mind 4 months later. when he paid a visit to his friend Claude Monet at Argenteuil. A family in a garden, a young woman, her summer dress fanned across the grass, an unself-conscious child, bright touches evoking flowers and sunlit greenery. Painted in vivid colors with brief broken strokes, the Monet family in their garden at Argenteuil is perhaps Manet's most successful essay at plein air painting. It has generally and rightfully been understood in the context of Manet's friendship with Claude Monet, who appears as the gardener stooping over his flower beds at left. For the canvas dates to the late summer of 1874, which Manet spent in Monet's company at Argenteuil, studying his younger colleagues' outdoor working methods. The composition was certainly not without precedent in Monet's oeuvre to date, but the visit also unfolded within the broader context of Manet's friendship with Morisot. And it is, in her works just shown at the first Impressionist exhibition, that the stronger analogues for his family portrait can be found. Women in white with children, a shawl, a fan, nature seen in bright, even sunlight, delicate staccato dots and dashes of paint. The Monet family portrait was not the only picture to emerge from Manet's time at Argenteuil. Alongside various river scenes, Monet in his studio boat, his wife and son on a sunny riverbank, Manet began this painting of a chic couple in the stern of a sailboat at Argenteuil. Swirls form in the vessel's wake before the water congeals into a solid mass, a horizonless blue that seems to recede not into imaginary space, but up and across the actual literal canvas. Manet borrowed this approach, like the abrupt truncation of the boat, from Japanese prints. The resulting effect is oceanic, but the peculiar thickness of the water conveys none of the movement and sparkle that he had captured with broken brushstrokes, borrowed from Monet in other river scenes at Argenteuil. Boating had a longer gestation than those works. Manet did not present it as a gift to his host or show it at the 1875 Salon, nor did he abandon it unfinished, though, instead retaining it in his studio, where he displayed it to the public in 1876 before submitting it to the Salon in 1879. Unusually for a Salon picture of this period, Manet did not inscribe a date beside his signature on boating, leaving us to wonder how extended and extensive his later interventions may have been. Pentiments visible to the naked eye reveal that Manet changed the position of the sail and rope. More intriguingly, evidence of scraping and reworking in the foreground opens up the possibility that the female figure, as she appears today, reflects a substantially later campaign, perhaps undertaken as Manet updated his canvas for display. For events moved quickly in the 1870s as the Impressionist group gained traction and coherence, and Manet sought to position himself as its leader. So different from the density of facture and solidity of form in the painting's male protagonist, Manet's open, fluttery handling in the young woman's striped dress and transparent veil suggest lessons learned from both Monet and Morisot. She, meanwhile, continued to pay close attention to her brother-in-law's Salon submissions, embarking on this canvas the summer after boating appeared at the Salon. An abruptly cropped boat, a central figure who returns our gaze, a companion at left, sketched in profile. Morisot's compositional ingredients here are the same as Manet's, but the effect of her picture, all glimmering reflections and wet zigzags of paint, is utterly distinct. In place of Manet's blue wall of water, Morisot provides a receding vista of park and lake, sunlight dancing, and ducks paddling across its surface. This picture first appeared at the Fifth Impressionist exhibition, which opened on April 1st, 1880. Morisot there unveiled a new body of work sharply distinguished from her previous outings with the group. Gone was the precise filigreed quality that had characterized her prior handling of paint, replaced by broad, open strokes, ribbons of pale color that dissolve form into touch, leaving the edges and corners of many canvases almost bare. Critics were enraptured. Her paintings were described as ravishing, exquisite, and yet stubbornly unfinished. Praise for one specific picture, a woman at her toilette, is emblematic of the larger trend. Critics rhapsodized over the painting's gray tones, with pale pink touches picked out here and there, remarking, "One lingers before these beginnings of pictures, wistful and enchanted. Morisot's literal subject here is no great mystery, of course. Seated before a cheval glass, a model turns her back to the painter, pinning or unpinning her hair. A side table offers up a still life of glassware, a powder puff, a white flower destined for or just removed from the protagonist's hair or décolletage. The mirror at left offers no image of her face or body, evading a conventional erotic trope inherited from old master depictions of the toilette of Venus. Is she dressing or undressing? The sense of enchanted indeterminacy invoked by so many critics has less to do, though, with this familiar subject than with Morisot's way of painting it. The strokes of white and gray, pink and blue, that both describe and obscure the scene portrayed. 1 week after Morisot unveiled her canvas, a curiously similar one appeared just 15 minutes' walk away at a small commercial gallery in the Passage des Princes. This space was operated by Manet's friend Émile Bergerac, editor of the fashion magazine La Vie Moderne, who had offered the painter a monographic exhibition back in February. Manet seems to have accepted this invitation only around April 1st, that is, at the very same moment when the Impressionist exhibition opened its doors. This left him roughly a week to mount the show. His hastily organized display of 25 pictures opened on April 8th. Was it the sight of Morisot's toilette scene in the Rue des Pyramides that had inspired him to show his own in the Passage des Princes? And what do we make of these paintings' striking similarities, not simply of motif, but also and especially of handling? Half-dressed before a mirror, Manet's model turns her back and tightens or loosens her corset, bearing a snowy expanse of shoulder and nape as she contemplates her own just discernible reflection. Brisk strokes of white conjure the pleats of her petticoat, the laces of her corset, but the same kind of mark-making repeats throughout the background, in the cascade of drapery at right, the patterned wallpaper, the surface of the mirror, its bright, beveled edge. Like Morisot's, Manet's all-over handling here creates an effect at once sensuous and peculiarly chaste, marking an abrupt departure from his previous exploration of the toilette theme, a somewhat brassier and more carefully finished depiction of a woman in her underthings before a mirror. Here, the protagonist is frankly a courtesan, applying makeup in a lavish boudoir as a top-hatted patron looks on. Manet completed the picture in 1877 and submitted it to the Salon jury that spring, showing it in the window of a luxury goods shop after its inevitable rejection. He gave it the title Nana in an apparent reference to Émile Zola's courtesan character. Before the Mirror has often been understood as a study for Nana, but contemporary correspondence suggests that the sketchier canvas actually post-dates the more finished one by some months. Understood not as a study, but as a discrete formal experiment, it stands in more complicated relation to Morisot's work shown in 1880. Her exploration of the modern toilette seems to have begun earlier than Manet's and proved more enduring. Both may have recognized in the contrivance of a woman's appearance, and indeed the literal painting of her face, an allegory for the painter's art. But while the material realities of the toilette ritual, the application of face powder, the lacing of a corset, were a source of erotic fascination and mystery for Manet, they were for Morisot, of course, a matter of ordinary daily experience, as toilette scenes she showed in the second and third Impressionist exhibitions seem to demonstrate. These, though, retain the whiskery touch and more literal precision of her earlier work. A paucity of exhibitions and sales between the spring of 1877 and the spring of 1880 makes Morisot's stylistic development difficult to track in these years. No Impressionist shows took place in 1878, and the birth that November of her daughter, Julie Manet, necessitated a suspension of Morisot's practice through the spring of 1879. Returning to her easel in the brief snatches available to a new parent, Morisot may have made necessity the mother of invention, using her suddenly more limited time to drive a transformation in her style. According to this timeline, Morisot's woman at her toilette must date from between the summer of 1879 and the spring of 1880, that is, several years after Manet's Before the Mirror. Whether Morisot would have seen Manet's picture before embarking on her own is another matter, though. By 1879, her visits to his studio were no longer as frequent as they had been in the days before her marriage. While Manet might have ready access to Morisot's studio, a converted bedroom at the apartment she shared with Eugène, Manet's home and studio were at separate addresses. And so calling on his family, on her in-laws, would not have brought Morisot into contact with her brother-in-law's most recent work. It's therefore quite possible that Morisot never saw Manet's picture before it went on view in the spring of 1880, and quite possible that the two artists arrived at such similar destinations by wholly separate routes. But if neither picture inspired the other, Morisot's decision to exhibit hers as a finished work surely influenced Manet's decision to show his own on the same terms. For was this not the truly radical act? Critics might lament that Morisot lacked the courage to finish her pictures, but wasn't it precisely courage that was required to see, to understand, to show pictures painted at this breathless pace as works complete in themselves? Manet plainly got it, writing to congratulate his sister-in-law on her smashing success one Saturday in early April. He concluded his brief note with a bit of good news. Ephrussi has bought The Woman in Brown, referring to the discerning critic and collector Charles Ephrussi, also a patron of Manet's at that time. The picture that had won Ephrussy's heart and opened his wallet was this work, Winter, which presents its stylish model in cold weather attire before an abstract, touched-all-over background, evocative of bare branches in the snow. 4 elegant Parisiennes correspond to the 4 seasons of the year. A pert brunette before spring-blooming rhododendrons, a pensive blonde before a rosebush heavy with summer blossom, a majestic redhead before a textile adorned with fall chrysanthemums, a wintry figure bundled up against the cold. All 4 are painted at half length on canvases of strikingly similar dimensions. 2 are Morisot's, 2 are Manet's, and neither artist painted any further seasons. The series that they form, however piecemeal, however contingent, has much to tell us about these painters, their mutual influence and admiration near the end of Manet's life. The notion of seasonal allegory was, of course, itself nothing new, traceable through Rococo decorative cycles to Renaissance prints and back to antiquity. The subject had lately been revived by a mutual friend of Manet and Morisot, Alfred Stevens, who reimagined the seasons as contemporary Parisiennes, but treated them essentially as fashion plates. The choice to portray the seasons as more ordinary women at half length was quite original and Morisot's own. At the 1880 exhibition, she showed this pair of pendants under the titles Summer and Winter, whether in homage to the 18th century artists she admired, or simply as a marketing ploy, to make 2 disparate and boldly experimental works seem something pleasingly coherent and art historically sanctioned. Manet took notice, and before a year had passed, embarked on his own seasonal Parisienne, a half-length springtime subject, presenting its adolescent model, the aspiring actress Jeanne de Marcy, in strict profile before a backdrop of rhododendrons. Manet's painting appeared under the simple title Jeanne in 1882, at a salon he did not realize would be his last. There it hung beside his final masterpiece, a bar at the Folies Bergère, which, however, attracted far less attention and admiration than the young actress in profile. Not a woman, as one critic famously enthused, but a bouquet, truly a perfume for the eyes. Though Manet's picture, unlike his sister-in-law's, did not bear a seasonal title upon its initial exhibition, it plainly depicted a model in the springtime of life, and quickly came to be understood as a vernal allegory. Manet soon set to work on a second canvas of identical format, cut from the very same bolt of cloth, posing Mary Laurent, a retired actress, demi-mondaine beauty, and close personal friend, in dark brown furs, her hands thrust into a muff, before a Japanese embroidered textile. The earliest recorded use of autumn as a title for this work, as of spring for the salon picture, occurs in notes made by Manet's godson in 1883. Autumn, portrait of Mary Laurent in a brown pelisse. Antonin Proust had commissioned the 4 seasons. He had already bought Jeanne, spring. No further trace survives of such a commission, if ever there was one. At a retrospective exhibition of Manet's work mounted after his death at the École des Beaux-Arts, Morisot singled out his seasons, among other works of particular note. Mary Laurent and Jeanne, 2 pendants, autumn and spring. Jeanne, shown in a garden, was painted in the studio. Mary, elle, bareheaded, her hands in a muff. Given her own skill and commitment as a plein air painter, Morisot's emphasis on the studio fiction of Jeanne's outdoor setting is perhaps of note. More importantly, regardless of their models, Morisot recognized these works as pendants and as representations of the two seasons she herself had not painted. Can she have failed to see in them a complement to her own pair, together forming a series, albeit one that existed only in the two painters' minds? Manet's contributions to the series reflected a larger ambition he confided to a friend in the late 1870s, namely to become the painter of Third Republican women, that is, of modern woman as a social type. This ambition would drive much of his late production, focused on images of elegant Parisiennes in their various habitats. He had certainly not invented this theme, already closely associated with Morisot, but whereas her portrayals of bourgeois ladies, debutantes, and matrons are animated by personal experience and close domestic contact, Manet's related depictions of socialites, actresses, and demi-mondaines are animated by erotic interest. Manet's pictorial world brims with gallant possibility, the animating force behind scenes captured in a painterly vocabulary otherwise indebted to Morisot. High-keyed colors, blue shadows, and loose open brushwork. This painting, shown at the Salon of 1880, an indoor-outdoor after-lunch scene, all sparkling glassware and rustling greenery, turns on the young man's implied question to his skeptical date. Employing many of the same elements, the greenery, the glassware, the after-lunch mise-en-scène, even the rhythmic vertical lines structuring the composition, Morisot evoked an utterly different setting, not commercial, but domestic, unfolding in a world emptied of men. If Morisot's pictorial universe is essentially a world without men, there is one crucial exception. Her husband, Eugène Manet, blonde and bearded, bearing an unmistakable resemblance to his brother, Édouard, whom Morisot, of course, never painted. Seated awkwardly astride a chair, Eugène gazes out a window at the harbor in this picture, Morisot's first of its model, painted on their honeymoon in England. The raised sash admits a breeze, filling the scene with light and air, but Eugène quickly tired of posing, as Morisot reported to her sister. I began something in the sitting room with Eugène, poor Eugène, who takes your place but is a less obliging model. He was, however, no neophyte, having posed for several of his brother's pictures, a sort of recumbent river god figure in both the luncheon on the grass and on the beach. The uneasy quality of the couple's new relationship, though, plainly colored his posing sessions in 1875 and cast a certain pall over their whole honeymoon. As Morisot confided to her sister, Eugène is still more taciturn than I am. A current of deep uncertainty seems to run through her correspondence about this new shared life, begun in what was at that time middle age and without much hope of having children. The couple evidently struggled to conceive on their honeymoon, adding poignancy to a glimpse caught through the window here of a little girl with her nanny on the quay, back turned. Upon their return to France, Morisot and Eugène parted ways for the rest of the summer. She went to stay with her sister. He returned to Paris. I feel quite lonesome without you, Eugène wrote, reporting on his visit to a dealer, for he had begun to act as his wife's agent. Remarking of her recent landscapes, he said, I should bring Édouard over to see them as well. Tender and respectful, Eugène's letter laid out a path forward for a marriage still finding its footing. On matters of art, his own approval would never matter next to his brother's, but this would be no cause for rancor. Manet might be Morisot's ideal artist, but Eugène would be her ideal husband. He had seen firsthand the support that making great art demanded, all the practical details that needed tending to, the negotiations that needed navigating. Having been Manet's brother had taught him to be Morisot's husband, and their partnership would in the end be one of the great love stories in modern art. Many years later, upon Eugène's death, Morisot hung the honeymoon portrait in her bedroom. The birth of their daughter in November 1878, of course, changed Morisot's life and work. Like her marriage, the birth of Bibi, as Julie was called within the family, at once brought Morisot closer to her brother-in-law and separated them further. Even in the first weeks of Julie's life, Manet was evidently in Morisot's thoughts, however. Writing to her sister Eve, she expressed a certain ambivalence. Well, I suppose I'm like everyone else. I'm sorry Bibi isn't a boy. First of all, she has the face for it. And then she would carry on an illustrious name. It was, of course, not Morisot's husband, but his brother who had given the Manet name its luster. Eugène, however, would distinguish himself as a father. Parenthood seems to have expanded his patience, including as a model, as this double portrait painted in the summer of 1881 attests. Here is an image of paternal devotion virtually unique in the whole 19th century. At left sits Eugène, balancing a toy model town on his knees. Julie appears as intent on her game as her father is on her. Bright paint evokes both sitters' fair coloring amidst a garden in riotous bloom. The following year, both artists turned their attention to Julie. Morisot and her family returned to a rented house in the suburban town of Bougival, while Manet and his took a house close by at Rueil. Making mud pies was a favorite game of Julie's that summer, and her mother's likeness at left shows her absorbed in the act, carefully scooping sand or gravel into a small red bucket, heedless of her frilly white dress. Manet's picture shows less interest in the game itself, instead arranging his young model prettily seated on the watering can. Much to Morisot's regret, he did not finish the portrait, perhaps leaving it behind with the child's parents that summer. Finishing pictures had become difficult for Manet, whose first symptoms of late-stage syphilis had manifested themselves several years earlier. By 1882, he was suffering from severe pain and progressive paralysis in his left leg. He would not live to see another summer. Morisot witnessed Manet's final agony in the spring of 1883. She experienced his death on April 30th as the death of a part of herself. Writing to Édouard, "These last days have been punishing. His suffering was horrendous, death in one of the most frightful forms I've ever witnessed firsthand. Add to these nearly physical emotions the long-standing friendship that bound me to Édouard, a whole past, our youth, our work, all collapsing, and you will understand that I am broken. I shall never forget the old days of friendship and intimacy with him, while I posed for him and his charming wit kept me alert through those long hours. Since then, various things have happened, various strains crept in between us. It hurts me a bit. That's not quite the word. It saddens me and something more. What had happened between them? Whose influence had created this estrangement, if estrangement there was? The sadness of this letter bespeaks a loss that predated Manet's death. Indeed, in a strange way, his death would restore Morisot's intimacy with Manet by granting a degree of access to his work that she had not enjoyed since those long hours together in his studio. In early 1884, after a triumphant retrospective at the École des Beaux-Arts, where the world first saw Manet's work all together, Morisot was convinced that the sale of her friend's studio contents would be a similar success. Reporting to her sister, "The discerning public is amazed by the strength of his work when seen in its entirety. There is a certainty of execution, a masterful touch that impresses even the ignorant and stuns us all. But the art market, still staggering back from the French stock market crash of 1882, could not support the sudden influx. Total proceeds from the sale amounted to just over half the low estimate. And as major works began to sell for next to nothing, the surviving Manet brothers intervened, fronting 20,000 francs to acquire what they could. In all, Morisot and Eugène bought 12 pictures at the sale, giving some away as gifts, notably to Degas, Monet, and Pissarro, and hanging the rest at home. I have 3 big pieces Morisot wrote to Édouard just after the sale: Laundry, Madame de Callias, and Young Girl in a Garden. Then several smaller ones: a café concert singer, 2 pastels, a woman's torso, some oysters. Did you see Madame de Callias at the studio? A woman in black reclining on a sofa with Japanese fans on a fabric background? It's a marvel that shall go to the Louvre. Joined by the Manets that already belonged to Morisot and Eugène, as well as further canvases inherited all too swiftly from Eugénie Manet and Gustave Manet, the pictures salvaged from the studio sale helped form both an intimate museum in the couple's home and a crucible for Morisot's subsequent production. A girl on the cusp of adulthood prepares for an evening out, putting the finishing touches on her hair before donning her dress. Morisot's powdery palette and palpitating brushwork suffuse the scene with freshness and nervous excitement, a sense memory, perhaps, of the painter's own teenage toilettes. Morisot returned to the toilette theme with renewed attention in the mid-1880s, drawing inspiration from a half-length nude she had acquired at Manet's studio sale. Unfinished and unsigned, that quintessential painter's painting surely interested Morisot in part because it laid bare her brother-in-law's methods, the dark, insistent contours, the draftsman-like brio generally lost in more finished works. The similarities here are plain enough. Each picture portrays a young woman at half length, arranging her hair, arms raised, a gold bracelet on one wrist. The bold contours of Morisot's figure suggest a particular attention to her brother-in-law's approach, though the modesty of her subject sets it apart from the frank sensuality of his. As a woman who had never received formal instruction in depiction of the live nude, Morisot also seems to have used Manet's unfinished work to guide her own exploration of this unfamiliar process, turning out a series of nudes after acquiring Manet's picture. The presence of Morisot's Manets in her own production was not always a matter of influence or imitation, though. His pictures also appear as totemic objects in Morisot's home studio. As early as 1877, Morisot had included Manet's fragmentary portrait of herself in a toilette scene, hanging half-effaced over a bureau in the right background. The same picture appears in a later work painted in 1890. Looking back from the mirror as if with the eyes of the painter herself, the portrait is reversed in reflection. Morisot's Manets resurface in a final series she painted of Julie, a graceful teenager dressed in mourning for her father, practicing the violin. In one, Manet's portrait of Isabelle Lemonnier looks on, hands politely folded as if listening to Julie's tune. In another, Morisot, painted by Manet, and her husband, painted by Degas, flank the drawing room hearth as Julie plays between them. One Manet that did not belong to Morisot, but that likely hung for a time in her home, seems to have left a deep impression. This late self-portrait, dapper in a bowler hat, his brush and palette in hand, it was inherited by the artist's widow, Suzanne, who moved in with Morisot and Eugène, occupying a flat with her mother-in-law in the couple's new home. There, Manet's portrait may well have inspired Morisot to paint her own likeness in 1885. Gazing out of the canvas as if into a mirror, Manet and Morisot invite us to watch them paint themselves. Both portraits are freely brushed. Manet is evidently left unfinished, with daubs of white and yellow literalizing the paints on his palette. Morisot's is brighter and still more openly rendered. Her palette hand a blur. Both subjects appear at midlife. Morisot's hair is dusted with white. Manet's rakish hat conceals a hairline in retreat. The flowers on her dress recall military decorations, and she was plainly proud of the picture, showing it in an exhibition of contemporary portraits in 1893. By the time of her death 2 years later, however, she had rolled it up and stashed it in a cupboard. What did it mean in the end for an artist still best known for appearing in another's work, the femme fatale of Manet's balcony, the friendly Medusa in his portrait with a bouquet of violets, at last to paint herself? What caused Morisot to roll up her own portrait and stash it away is a mystery, but may have had to do with her acquisition of this latter work. She bought her own portrait with a bouquet of violets, the sale of Duret's collection, in 1894, and died a year later. As the last Manet she acquired, the portrait forms a poetic bookend to the first, the still life with a bouquet of violets, which Manet had given her 20 years and a lifetime before. As one observer has lately pointed out, Manet's likenesses of Morisot are all paintings of intimacy, but none more so than this work, its private meaning still elusive as the lines between salutation and signature in the painted note. Thank you for your I'm so grateful for your attention. I realize this was sort of a long one. I would be delighted to entertain questions, but please do not feel inhibited if you need to move on with your day as well. Yes, down here. So the question for those joining us online was, did Manet die of syphilis? We believe that he did. I mean, I suppose technically dies of gangrene following the amputation of his left leg, but the reason for the progressive paralysis, we believe, is tertiary syphilis. So the question is, did he infect his wife? We do not know. She does not bear children after their marriage. And so I suppose it is not impossible that she suffered from sterility, which is sometimes a symptom of syphilis infection in women. But we do not know. It's also possible that they had, a mariage blanc, that they had a chaste marriage. We don't know. What age was Morisot when she died? Let's see, she's born in 1841 and she dies in 1895. So I think that makes her 54, is that right? Yeah.
Thank you so much for this presentation. It was very interesting. I was wondering, I've heard other art historians say that they believe that Manet and Morisot had either a repressed love or an affair before she married his brother. Based on your presentation, I don't feel like you believe that. Can you maybe talk a little bit about what you think of the relationship and that theory?
That's a great question. Thank you very much. So the question is whether Manet and Morisot had a repressed love relationship and whether this had to do with her marriage to his brother. I think that when we see all these wonderful portraits, the sort of temptation to read into them is powerful and is a normal human desire, I think, to read deeply personal meanings into them. Clearly, there was some kind of spark between them, whether that was an intellectual and artistic spark or, a romantic spark of some kind, or maybe some combination of all of these things. I think what we can be sure of is there was certainly not a sexual relationship between them. That is a total impossibility based on a combination of the archival record and just the totally unfailing social correctness of Berthe Morisot as a woman of her class, whom Manet would have treated accordingly. So just, I do feel pretty confident about shutting that dimension of speculation down. Whether either of them felt, some other form of attachment, I think, it's a matter of speculation. The correspondence gives us no reason to believe that that is the case. The documentary record gives us no reason to believe that that is the case. And for the purposes of this exhibition, I really wanted to focus on the kind of artistic relationship and in a way, sort of professional exchange, which is obviously deeply tinged with the personal in all sorts of ways, since, after all, they end up as members of the same family. I do think that sometimes the kind of desire to read in a narrative, a romantic narrative, can distract us from the pictures themselves, especially from her pictures. And so that's my reason for not indulging in that speculation, though I don't mean to discourage those who feel that they see that in the pictures. Like, that's great and fine. Yeah. I hope that that's a satisfying answer. I think, how about right here?
You pointed out the relationship between these two great painters are bi-directional rather than one way. Is there your major discovery, or other scholars already noticed this before?
So I think that there's sort of growing, thank you, that's a great question. So the question is sort of mutual, that we see this as a relationship of mutual influence rather than just influence that went in one direction. And I think that there's growing scholarly consensus that this is the case. I think many art historians used to think of this influence as flowing only from Manet to Morisot, and increasingly we're ready to see the ways in which she influenced his work. I will say that I think helpful in this process was an exhibition of which I was one of the curators at the Getty Museum and the Art Institute of Chicago in 2019 to 2020, called Manet and Modern Beauty, which was the first exhibition that focused on the late work of Édouard Manet. the late work is really where we see Manet's inspiration by Morisot. We really, the pictures that were for many, many years written off as minor, commercial, feminine paintings of pretty girls and flowers that he produces in his final, 5 to 7 years. These are the works where we really see him learning a great deal from Morisot, and it's only once we're willing to take those works seriously as important modern art that we can take seriously her influence on him. I hope that's a satisfying answer. Please. So the question is, do we know what happened to how Morisot died? And we do. So her daughter had what was probably influenza. Morisot was nursing her and caught it and died of pneumonia. So that is the story of her death. Yeah, back here.
I'm wondering why the exhibit is Manet and Morisot and not Morisot and Manet.
So the question is, why is the exhibition Manet and Morisot and not Morisot and Manet? And it's a great question, and actually for the first couple of years as we were developing it, we were calling it Morisot and Manet. I think that there are some reasonable reasons to call it Manet and Morisot. It's alphabetical. I was just going to say it's alphabetical. By birth order. And sort of by order in which, the order that the story flows in. He's already a kind of famous and notorious figure at the beginning of the relationship, and her star really kind of rises over the course of the story. So I think that for narrative reasons, it makes a lot of sense. I will also say that, market research indicated that we would be able to get more people to come and learn this wonderful story if we led with his name. So.
Hello, thank you so much for this lecture. In one of the slides, I think you mentioned that Morisot was the only woman to exhibit in one of the salons, if I recall that correctly. I was wondering, one other key Impressionist woman was Mary Cassatt, and do we know of any correspondence between the two ladies and exchange of influence and just like her reception in the key cohort of these Impressionist painters?
So that's a great question. It's about Morisot as sort of the only woman who exhibits under her own name in the first Impressionist exhibition in 1874. There do seem to have been 2 other women who exhibited under pseudonyms, and then who did not go on to become sort of faithful members of the group. They did not continue to exhibit with the group. So we really think of Morisot as the founding female member of the Impressionist group. Mary Cassatt, whom you also asked about very astutely, joins the Impressionists in 1879, also at the invitation of Degas. I think it's interesting that that's the year when Morisot is sort of taking the year off because of the birth of her daughter. It's the only exhibition in which Morisot does not participate. But Morisot and Cassatt do become, friendly colleagues. They go to exhibitions together and things like this, and may indeed have done a little bit of painting side by side. Here's an opportunity for a shameless pitch. On January 10th, we will host a symposium associated with this exhibition, and there will be a paper given by my wonderful colleague Mary Morton from the National Gallery of Art in Washington on the relationship between Morisot and Cassatt. So please come back. Yes, please, right here. Great question. So this is a question about the portrait of Morisot's mother and sister that Manet sort of fiddled with. Instead of giving her advice, he picks up her brushes and repaints, and she's very upset about it. There is no indication, per your question, that he apologized for this. I wonder if any women in the room are familiar with repairing relationships with senior male colleagues by just simply kind of gliding past. You know, I think that this is a dynamic that probably is sadly familiar to many people even still today. Yeah, yeah. Anything else? No? Okay, thank you so much.